Canada is known for its vast wilderness, but on May 20th, 1967, the remote woods of Falcon Lake, Manitoba, became the setting for one of the most physically damaging UFO encounters on record. Unlike many sightings that involve distant lights or unverified stories, this case centers on a man who walked away with burns, radiation sickness symptoms, and physical scars that baffled doctors for decades. That man was Stefan Michalak, a pragmatic 51-year-old industrial mechanic and amateur geologist. It was the Victoria Day long weekend, and Michalak had ventured into the bush near Falcon Lake to prospect for silver and quartz. Around midday, while chipping away at a rock formation, the tranquility of the forest was shattered by the sound of geese frantically honking. Michalak looked up and saw two cigar-shaped objects, glowing red, descending silently from the sky. One of the craft hovered in the air, while the other landed on a flat rock outcropping about 160 feet away from him. Michalak, assuming it was a secret American military experimental craft that was experiencing engine trouble, sat and sketched the objects in his notebook for nearly half an hour. He observed the landed craft changing color from red to gray-gold as it cooled. He approached cautiously, noticing a scent of sulfur and burning electronics in the air. As he got closer, he heard whirring sounds and voices coming from inside, muffled, human-like sounds that seemed to be communicating. Convinced the pilots were in distress, Michalak called out in English, Russian, German, Italian, French, and Ukrainian, offering help. The voices stopped immediately. He approached the open hatch on the side of the craft, peering inside. He described a maze of lights and panels, but saw no pilots. Suddenly, 3 panels slid across the opening, sealing the ship like a camera shutter. Michalak reached out with his gloved hand to touch the smooth metallic surface of the hull. It was so hot that it instantly melted the fingertips of his rubber-coated glove. Before he could react, the craft began to rotate. A grid-like exhaust vent on the side of the ship turned toward him, and with a sudden blast of hot gas, the object shot up into the sky. The blast hit Michalak squarely in the chest, setting his shirt and undershirt on fire. Panicked, he ripped off his burning clothes and stumbled back, disoriented and in severe pain. He watched as the 2 craft disappeared into the clouds. Left alone in the woods, he was violently ill, vomiting repeatedly as he tried to stagger back to civilization. When he finally reached a highway and flagged down a passing RCMP officer, the officer, thinking Michalak was drunk due to his erratic behavior and red eyes, refused to help him. Michalak eventually made it to a hospital in Winnipeg, where doctors were stunned. He had a grid-shaped pattern of first-degree burns across his chest and abdomen, a perfect match for the exhaust vent he described. Over the next few weeks, he suffered from diarrhea, headaches, weight loss, and a drop in his lymphocyte count, classic symptoms of radiation poisoning. The site itself was later investigated by the RCMP and the Royal Canadian Air Force, who found high levels of radiation in the soil where the craft had landed. What makes Falcon Lake unique is that Michalak never sought fame or money. He was a sober, hard-working family man who simply wanted to know what had burned him. He spent the rest of his life with the grid burned into his skin, a permanent souvenir of a close encounter that was arguably too close. If you want to dive into the official investigation, the radiation evidence, and why the US and Canadian governments took this case so seriously, stay tuned and follow the channel for the next segment. Stefan Michalak's story might have been dismissed as a hallucination or a hoax, if not for the physical evidence he carried on his body and the radioactive traces left at the landing site. Unlike many UFO witnesses who are ridiculed, Michalak was taken seriously by authorities almost immediately because his injuries were undeniable. The grid-like burns on his chest were geometric and precise, defying explanation as a simple accident like a cooking mishap or a forest fire. In the weeks following the encounter, the investigation ramped up. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, the Royal Canadian Air Force, RCAF, and the Department of Health and Welfare all became involved. When investigators finally located the landing site, a challenge in itself due to the dense wilderness, they found physical corroboration of Michaelak Mags. There was a circle of vegetation roughly 15 feet in diameter, where the leaves and moss appeared withered and dead, consistent with exposure to intense heat or radiation. Soil samples taken from the center of this circle revealed something alarming: high levels of radiation. Specifically, they found radium-226, a highly radioactive isotope. While radium-226 occurs naturally in trace amounts, the concentrations found at the site were significant enough to warrant a hazardous materials warning. Furthermore, a piece of silver metal found lodged in a rock crevice at the site was analyzed and found to be nearly pure silver, but coated with radioactive material. Michaelak had been prospecting for silver, but he hadn't brought radioactive isotopes with him. The medical evidence was equally compelling. Michaelak's symptoms, nausea, weight loss, blackouts, and a drop in white blood cell count, mirrored acute radiation syndrome. He was examined at the Mayo Clinic in the United States, where psychiatrists confirmed he was of sound mind and not prone to fabrication. A report from the Mayo Clinic stated that if Michaelak's story was a lie, it was one he believed completely. The burns on his chest flared up repeatedly over the years, a recurring physical trauma that plagued him until his death in 1999. The investigation also uncovered strange discrepancies. Michaelak claimed he had thrown a rock at the craft before it took off, and indeed, investigators found a rock at the site that appeared to have been subjected to intense heat on one side. However, the Canadian government's final report was inconclusive. They couldn't prove it was an alien spacecraft, but they also couldn't prove it was a hoax. The official RCAF report classified the object as unidentified, and the case remains one of the few in Canadian history labeled as unexplained by the Department of National Defense. Interestingly, the U.S. government also took an interest. The Condon Committee, a famous University of Colorado UFO study funded by the U.S. Air Force, looked into the case. While the committee was notoriously skeptical and dismissed most sightings, they struggled to debunk Falcon Lake. The combination of radiation, burns, and a credible witness with no history of mental illness made it a stubborn case that refused to fit into neat skeptical boxes. Michaelak's life was turned upside down. He faced harassment from the public and the media, but he never changed his story. He wasn't selling books or touring the lecture circuit. He was a man who went into the woods to find silver and came back with a mystery that cost him his health. If you want to know about the lasting legacy of Falcon Lake, the theories about secret military tech versus extraterrestrials, and the commemorative coin that the Canadian government actually minted for this event, stay tuned and follow the channel for the final segment. More than half a century later, the Falcon Lake incident remains a cornerstone of UFO lore, not just in Canada, but globally. It stands apart because it transcends the typical "I saw a light in the sky" narrative. This was a close encounter of the second kind, one that left physical traces on both the environment and the witness. The grid pattern burns on Stefan Michaelak's chest became iconic, a gruesome receipt for a transaction with the unknown. Over the years, skeptics have tried to poke holes in the story. Some suggested Michaelak burned himself with a barbecue grill or exhaust pipe to perpetrate a hoax. Others theorized he stumbled upon a secret Soviet or American military test site. However, none of these theories explain the localized radiation at the site, the specific nature of his illness, or the fact that he had no motive to lie. Michalak never sought to monetize his experience. In fact, he shied away from the spotlight, focusing on his family and his work until his death in 1999 at the age of 83. His son, Stan Michalak, co-authored a book titled When They Appeared, detailing the toll the event took on their family, emphasizing that his father was a man of integrity who was baffled and hurt by what happened to him. The incident has also been embraced by Canadian culture in a surprising way. In 2018, the Royal Canadian Mint released a commemorative silver coin depicting the Falcon Lake encounter. The coin features a colorized image of the cigar-shaped craft and Michalak, and, in a nod to the physical evidence, it glows in the dark, mimicking the radiation and the glowing exhaust vent. This official recognition by a government body is rare in the world of ufology, signaling that even if the government doesn't admit to aliens, it acknowledges that something historic occurred in those woods. The theories about what Michalak saw continue to evolve. Some researchers point to the cigar shape and the intense heat as evidence of a nuclear-powered craft. The 1960s were the height of the Cold War and the space race. Both the US and the USSR were experimenting with exotic propulsion systems. Could Michalak have inadvertently walked in on a crashed experimental drone or a secret test vehicle? The voices he heard, which he thought sounded human but unintelligible, might support the idea of human pilots. But why would they leave him there, burned and sick, without retrieving their technology or silencing him? And why has no government ever claimed the craft? Ultimately, Falcon Lake is a mystery that refuses to be solved. It sits in that uncomfortable gray zone between science and the supernatural. We have a credible witness, medical records, radioactive soil, and a story that never changed. Stefan Michalak went looking for precious metals and found something far more enduring, a permanent place in history as the man who got too close. Today, visitors can hike to the site in Whiteshell Provincial Park. The vegetation has grown back, but the rocks remain silent witnesses to the day the sky came down. Whether it was a visitor from another world or a secret from our own, the Falcon Lake incident is a reminder that the wilderness still holds secrets. And sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what you see, but what touches you back. The Falcon Lake incident challenges us to look at the physical evidence of the unexplained. It proves that some mysteries leave scars. If this deep dive into Canada's most famous UFO case intrigued you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Share this video to keep the search for truth alive. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.